Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 65. And before I dive in, I just want to give you a quick reminder to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. This will make sure that you get regular access to these love-promoting episodes, and it means you'll never miss one. So go ahead and hit subscribe. So I am recording today's episode in the middle of the holiday season when a lot of people are spending a lot of time with their spouse, with their families, and also not only is it the holiday season, but in a lot of parts of the world, there are a lot more COVID pandemic restrictions again. So many of you listening have been spending more time, at least this week while I'm recording it, maybe not while you're hearing this, with your partner. And this can oftentimes be, it can present some challenges, to say the least. And so today I want to talk about really one of the biggest barriers to love, and a sort of barrier that comes up or presents itself more often when we're spending a lot of time with our partner. But it's one of the barriers that I see in highly sensitive people a lot. And I really want to address it and kind of pull it apart for you and help you with it, because it's something that is 100% in your domain, as I oftentimes call it, like something that an area that you can do something about so that you can really open your marriage back up to much more love. So it might be coming up more for you recently, or it might just be a thing that happens a lot in your marriage because you're human and because you're a highly sensitive human. And what I mean by the barrier is judgment. It's really a giant focus with my clients. We look at judgment a lot because it keeps them from love or from experiencing love more often. And it's very natural to the human brain. We all have a tendency towards judgment of our person, of ourselves, of others, right? And perhaps more so as highly sensitive people, we have this tendency. And I will share why in a little bit here. But really, for all of us, there's something kind of compelling about the feeling of judging, the feelings we get when we're judging, right? Or there's a kind of something compelling about actually judging another person. It's very tempting and weirdly satisfying in the moment. I've talked about this in various places. It's kind of that feeling of one up when we're judging someone, of better than, right? And it can be very much just an egocentric urge, right? To kind of look down on another person in order to kind of feel puffed up or validated in ourselves. So this is one of the reasons, this is part of human psychology to sort of tend in this direction sometimes, right? But the truth is, when it's ongoing in a relationship, it is not so fun. When judgment becomes frequent, or even kind of a chronic state, it doesn't feel good, because what it actually feels like to us, the ones who are judging, it feels like irritation, annoyance, condescension, disdain, frustration, or really what I sense as sort of hardening against, like feeling hard, a hardness, right? Hardening against the person you ultimately really want to feel soft and open and loving towards, right? When you were judging our partner, right? So let's just take a moment and talk about, what does judgment actually sound like? What does it actually appear as. So most often it appears in some form or other of like a should, like he should do XYZ, or he shouldn't be so XYZ, right? So, you might see, for example, your partner paying the bills late, right? Or impatiently saying, stop that, really loudly at the kids, right? Or maybe arriving like 15 minutes late to everything, right? And if I were to get inside some of your minds when you were witnessing this in your partner, I'd probably hear your brain thinking something like, he should be more organized. He should not talk to the kids that way. He needs to be a better dad. He's so irresponsible. He should be more responsible, right? In other words, basically, he shouldn't be that way. He should do it differently. He's not doing it right. He should do it right. He should do it my way or this other way, right? So here are some of the judgmental thoughts my clients have shared with me that they've had towards their partner. Now, I'm going to say this a little different. These ones aren't going to sound like shoulds, because oftentimes a judgment is just like, it doesn't seem to contain a should, but it actually does. So I'll share what I mean by that. These are some that my clients have said, like, he's insensitive, right? He's not communicative. He doesn't take initiative. He doesn't talk about his feelings. He isn't a good listener. He works too much, right? All of those are judgments, right? And contained in each one of these little, he's insensitive, like all those things I just said, is sort of this sentiment of that's not right or that's bad, right? So implied in all of those is basically he shouldn't or he should. For example, he's insensitive and he shouldn't be, right? Or he's not communicative and he should be, right? Or he should talk about his feelings. He should be a good listener. He shouldn't work too much, right? Right? So we can always kind of, if we notice our brains like judging in one form or another, like he never shares his feelings vulnerably, right? We can really then ask ourselves, like, what is the should that my brain is like, what is the should that my brain is telling me should happen here, right? And we're going to look at why we want to notice this, right? So let's try this for now. I want you to ask yourself right now, what should your man or your partner do better at or be better at? Or what should he not do so much of? And you can pause this to come up with that for yourself. And once you have an answer, I want you to ask yourself this question. When you're thinking this, that he should or shouldn't do this, whatever, how do you feel? When you're shoulding him, how do you feel? For most of us, we're going to feel some version of disdain, frustration, annoyance, exasperation, indignation, resentment, right? And when you're feeling, whatever you're feeling, some version of what I just said, what do? How do you show up when you're feeling annoyance and frustration or indignation or exasperation? Most of us will do things like criticize, or we won't actually listen in a conversation, or we might roll our eyes, or we might boss him around. We might, right, like tell him what he should do, right? Does that sound familiar? Yeah, it really oftentimes will lead, when we're judging, it can lead to various forms of control, which we were talking about pretty recently in depth, control. And it really oftentimes leads to poor communication, right? And no interest like in physical intimacy or emotional intimacy, right? Which those are like, that's one of the things you want most is emotional intimacy, right? But when we're like feeling those emotions, frustration, annoyance, resentment, disdain, right? We're not going to feel interest in any kind of intimacy, right? We're not going to be able to communicate very well. we're going to come from a more like kind of negative energy with our partner, right? And this is why I'm calling this episode Should Pain. Because it feels bad when we're judging, when we're shoulding, right? And it feeds more of the suffering. It feeds more suffering the more we get caught up in shoulds and judgments. So I want to just illustrate this with an example from my own life. Remember, this has happened probably more than once, where my brain slipped into thinking my husband should be more assertive with his parents. And there was one example of like when I thought he should be assertive with his mom, right? The way I would be, right? And my thought was like, he should stick to making the specific request of her he said he would, right? And so when I witnessed him talking to her and he did not stick to the specific request he said he would have of her, he just kind of like hinted at it. My brain then went on to say, what a pushover, right? Like, he should have done that. What a pushover. He shouldn't be a pushover, right? That kind of thing. And what I felt was strong irritation, even maybe like it felt kind of infuriating, right? And it was also discombobulating because I, as his wife, I don't want to not like him and the things he does. I don't want to feel irritation towards him, right? I want to love him. I want to understand him. I want to feel kind feelings when I think of him, right? But in the moment when I was thinking he should stick to making the specific request of her that he said he would, and he shouldn't be a pushover, right? In that moment, I was like in what I call judgmentville, right? I was bewitched by should pain, right? Caught up in believing that like he really should be different than he is. And really the only way that I'd feel good about him would be for him to do what I think he should do. Yeah? So whenever you find yourself thinking your partner should be some way that he isn't, that's your brain falling into judgmentville and creating should pain for you, right? And it's never a fun place to be, right? Because that should leads to an environment of frustration and irritation and, again, what I call hardness between you, right? And when you're coming from this should place, when you're interacting with him from this judgy energy, what happens is it's so often met with defensiveness, right? And your partner feeling like he can't do things right with you. And oftentimes then you get met with judgment from his end in return, right? That he starts judging you. I know so many of you can relate to this. So another way of putting this is shoulding our partner, judging our partner, tends to lead to a culture between you and your partner of non-respect, of non-understanding, and really non-acceptance. And do you know what love really is? It's genuine, deep acceptance and warmth of heart towards really all that your partner is. It's really an embracing and allowing of who your partner is. It's an including of all of them in your heart, not just the parts you like. It's not judging parts of your honey as wrong and bad. Okay? Because judgment feels like a wall between you, right? A wall that you're trapped behind, one that you can't span to feel the closeness and connection you really want deep down with this person, right? Judgment puts us out of presence with our partner. It puts us out of our hearts and really deep into our own heads. And it really never leads us to feeling close or connected, right? When we're genuinely open to who our partner is, to all of who they are. This doesn't mean you have to like approve of all that they are, but when we're open to and accepting of all that our partner is, we feel a softness in us. instead of a wall. And as you've probably heard me say, love thrives in softness, in safety, right? This is like the shelter of love that we crave, that we all crave, even your man, yeah? That soft safeness we feel when we're genuinely accepted. But as highly sensitive people, it really can be easy to judge, to get judgy, to see the ways our partner should be and the things he should do or shouldn't do, right? And this is a natural part of our trait, of our vigilance, right? Of how our brains are really like wired to be hyper vigilant and on the lookout for danger or threats or things going wrong, things that aren't right? And this is not a terrible thing. This served a beautiful purpose in the evolution of our species. But it can be problematic in our love relationships in modern times. Because in modern times, like there's really no longer an actual physical threat most of the time. But anything that threatens our own ideas of how things should be in love, or our own ideas of how things should look in our relationship, those things feel threatening to us. So we tend to be on the lookout for things not going how we think they should go, or focusing on differences and then judging them, right? And also with our tendency, our beautiful tendency as highly sensitive people towards being extra conscientious, right? And often, that comes with a strong sense of personal values. Oftentimes they're beautiful values, right? But what happens is from there, we can tend to think our partner should be like we are, right? Should have the same kind of conscientiousness, should subscribe to our ways of loving and living, right? Should act out from the same values that we have, right? And so our brain naturally scans and finds ways that he should be that he isn't, things he should do that he isn't, right? Things he shouldn't do that he should, things he shouldn't say or should say, right? All of that. It's very normal as a human, and especially as a highly sensitive human. And I know this intimately myself. Like it's kind of like an automatic thing that our brains offer up. Yeah. And I'm going to plant the seed right now. Like just because we have shoulds doesn't mean we have to buy into them. Doesn't mean we need to get wrapped up in them or believe our shoulds. Hey, I always say a thought is never a problem until we believe it. A should is never a problem until we believe it. So I'm going to just offer you that little golden nugget right here. And we're going to get more into some ways of working with this in a few minutes. But for me lately, this has been another big area of growth. Like I've been actually circling back to working with this part of my brain and to improving this for myself because it just feels like crapola when I judge my husband. And I've noticed he doesn't like it much either. Right? And, it's not how I want to feel. I don't want to be judging him. I don't want to feel the feelings that come from judging him all the time. And it's definitely not the place I want to show up from. It's not the place I want to act from towards him. It doesn't feel good, and I don't like what it creates between us or who I become when I act out of my judginess, right? So deep down, I don't want to judge my husband. And I bet you don't either. I want to feel love, and you want to feel love, right? Which judgment takes us far away from. We can't love and judge in the same moment at the same time, right? So every time we're judging, we're missing out on a moment we could be feeling love. I've probably said this on the podcast before, but Byron Katie has the famous saying. She says, when you fight reality, you always lose, but only 100% of the time. I always lose when I get wrapped up in judgment, right? Judgment is literally fighting reality. You always lose when you get wrapped up in judgment. Right? You can't win when you're fighting against what is. Your husband not communicating. Your husband eating too many peanut butter cups. I'm just going to use that one until I don't think it's funny anymore. Right? Like, that's the reality. Right? When I think my husband should know something, my brain loves to tell me that he should know this, right? But he doesn't know it. What I'm doing is I'm just creating annoyance and exasperation for myself. And I'm the one who has to walk around feeling it, right? Just because my brain is judging him doesn't mean he's going to change it, right? And the result is I'm creating all those feelings for myself. It's kind of like banging my head on a wall in order to feel better, right? It just doesn't work. Right? Just because I think he should know doesn't make him know. The judgment can't change that he didn't know. I can tell him what I think he should know, right? And that's always like fine, especially if we deliver it skillfully. But I can't take away that he doesn't know until I tell him. And maybe I can't ever take that away. Like, I can't take away him eating peanut butter cups. Like, he's going to do that or not, whether I judge him or not for it, right? So judgment changes nothing. It never creates changes in other people. It creates negative ick inside of us. It's really futile. It's really simply a fight with reality, right? And that's always a fight that you and I are both going to lose. Now, I want to be clear that, again, as always, I'm never saying if you notice something that you'd like to have shift in your relationship, it's a beautiful place for requests, right? And making a request is best received and most effective when you're coming from an energy that's soft, to kind of keep it simple. That's kind. So making a request from judgment, it's going to feel like a demand. It's going to feel negative, and it's not very likely to get you what you want, right? When you're exasperated or irritated, it's not conducive to inviting changes from your partner's side. So that's just a side note. And here's the last, like, really important part of this should pain problem, why judging causes so much pain for us, which is that as highly sensitive, very conscientious people, judging the person we most want to love actually feeds even more judgment of the most toxic kind, judgment of our own selves, right? Because now we're not only thinking our partner should not be how they are, right? Or should do things differently. We're also thinking we ourselves should be different than we are, right? We think we shouldn't be judgy. We think we shouldn't be showing up critically. We think we shouldn't feel irritated and annoyed, right? In other words, we think we're not being good partners. We're not being the person we want to be in the relationship. Like when we really step back and we evaluate ourselves, we feel like we're not being who we want to be and loving like we want to. I've seen this so often when women know that they're being judgy or feel like frustrated a lot or annoyed with their partner a lot. They're then judging themselves too, because they're not being who they think they should be, or who they want to be, or even who they know they are deep down, which is truly a loving person. Right? So for our sensitive hearts, like yours and mine, judgment has this tendency to feed on itself. It really just hurts. So, what's the solution? I suggest going on a judgment cleanse. I've been playing with this lately. It's really fun, actually, when you kind of make it a game. Simply put, a judgment cleanse is about identifying how often your mind goes to judgmentville, how often your brain is shoulding your partner. You can think about this kind of as like shining a light, like a flashlight, an attention flashlight inside your brain. Noticing when the sentences of he should or he shouldn't pops up, right? Or again, just judgments like he's not doing XYZ, And you'll notice it's like with a tone, right? It's not like he's not very communicative. It's like he's not communicative, right? There's a frustration that accompanies it. So it's kind of important to notice that as we start to bring this kind of witnessing attention to our own minds, like to know that not all the thoughts that are there in you are really going to show up sounding like sentences in your mind or like subtitles across a movie screen, right? The way that you actually might first notice judgment or shoulds are as feelings, right? And that's how I tend to. Like, you might notice it as a sense of hardness, right? A sense of annoyance, a sense of frustration, a sense of or condescension or resentment or anger, right? And when you, like, that's beautiful to catch yourself in the feeling state of this, right? The feeling state of judgment. And when and if you do, imagine that these emotions are like a pool, like a pond, right? And as you notice them, you can kind of like take a fishing pole, cast that like hook into the pool, and it's like you're fishing for the thought that's behind them, right? Fishing for the thought in the form of words, right? Like you're reeling in the sentence that's creating the emotion. Does that make sense? And another way of asking this is like, if this feeling had words, what would it say? Right? Like you feel the annoyance and you're like, what is this feeling? If this feeling had words, what would it say? Like, oh, he should be washing the dishes more frequently, right? Or he never washes the dishes. Got it? So that's where we start. We've got to start with observing your brain's tendency to judge, right? Without witnessing it, without seeing this, you're never going to be able to have any traction, any capacity to change this tendency of your brain. So do this deep dive into watching this part of your brain over the next week, over the next month, and really notice that when you catch yourself in the judgment, in the should, what it creates for you, how you feel, how you show up when you're judging, and what it creates between you, how then he responds or reacts when you show up from that place. It's really fascinating. My own boot camp with this has been fascinating, right? My mind's favorite, one of its favorite habits is judgment, is should. But here's the thing, and I want to offer this to you. Instead of judging myself for judging, for my brain's tendency to judge, I observe it with a kind sensitivity, right? Because what good is that to judge my judgment, right? It takes intimacy and love away from myself. And withdrawing love from myself and from my man will never create more love or positivity. Yeah? Taking love away never creates more love. That simple. So my invitation to you is to do this observation from this neutral place or a compassionate place and a curious place. This is really what I call the seat of the witness or the compassionate witness, right? It's a place of curiosity, observation, neutrality, maybe even compassion. I call it the seat of the witness, but I also call it having sensitive awareness, right? And this is key to not judging your judging, to be bringing kind sensitivity to yourself, to your brain, to your habit of mind, of shoulding, right? And watching it from this neutral, curiosity-filled, kind place. Part of this will be next week's topic. We're going to dive into how curiosity is the antidote to so many of our issues in love. But today is really just about being curious and observing your own brain, curious about your own brain, right? Because when we come from this curious and sensitively aware place, we can really witness our judging mind without getting so caught up in it, right? Instead, it's kind of like we're on the outside, observing, looking in as an observer. And this is the place from which we can see our judgment simply as a thought, a kind of weird, quirky habit of mind, instead of as the truth, as a fact, right? And as we can witness like this, we're not so enmeshed in it. We're not so caught up in it. So the emotion of the judgment isn't as strong. It might still be there a little bit. We might still feel annoyed or, frustrated, but it won't be so consuming. It's kind of like, oh, there's my brain offering me a judgy thought again. Of course, this is what my brain does, but I'm not going to bite the bait. I'll just watch that thought as it moves by instead of getting caught on it. Yeah? You can even use those words when you notice your brain shoulding or judging. This is a seemingly simple thing, but it's hugely powerful. This self-awareness without judgment. And when you are noticing the judgment and you're also noticing what it creates in you, the feeling, the way you show up, the results that you have between you, the way you interact from that place and how your partner responds, your brain is also going, when your brain sees this, right? It's on some level, it's going to really recognize this is not serving me. And your brain will naturally begin to give up the habit of judging so much. You might never totally stop having thoughts that are judgmental, but it's not going to be nearly so often or so strong or so painful. You won't have nearly so much should pain. I just want to end today with sharing one way of thinking about this, which is that as highly sensitive people, our brains tend to naturally be set to two very different settings. One of them is highly compassionate, kind, loving, right? So many of you know that you are deep down a highly compassionate, kind, and loving human, right? But we also have this other setting, which is highly judgmental. And this can tend to be the default, particularly when we're stressed out, yeah? Which is easy to do. It's a place that's easy to fall into as highly sensitive people, right? So our brains are going to naturally revert to this place of being highly judgmental sometimes, maybe oftentimes, depending, right? So obviously this second setting, highly judgmental, causes a lot of pain and distance inside of our relationship and inside of ourselves. Yeah. And the other setting, the highly compassionate and loving, that setting of our brain truly creates a deep sense of empowerment when we live from there and pride in ourselves, right? And allows us to be who we want to be. It allows us to come from a place of integrity, and it opens us up really to love, to connection and supportiveness in our marriages. And here's the thing, you're the one who gets to decide which setting to operate from, which setting you want to be the default one, the one that steers the ship. It really can take some dedication, some conscious intention, some emotional stewardship to make the loving option your default setting. But it is so worth it because it's love and life-changing. So which will you choose? Letting your brain run on the default judgy setting feels easier in the moment, but leads to long-term pain and suffering in yourself, in your marriage. The second one takes more conscious effort, but leads to so much more love and joy. So if you want to make this part of you the default, start noticing your mind. Really give yourself this judgment cleanse as I've described it. And by the way, making this part of you like the primary force in your life, the part of you that you live by, it never means that you have to stay with your partner, right? And it never means that you have to lose out on what you want. It just means you actually have more real choice, more freedom to make a choice to show up in a way that feels in like real deep integrity with who you want to be, right? How you want to live and love. And that is always going to lead you to creating the kind of results that you feel so good about in your life and in all of your relationships. And if you want to accelerate this process and take this deeper and remove much more deeply this barrier to feeling love and admiration of your honey, and ultimately build what I call a lasting love brain, which is this other setting. In other words, making the loving, compassionate, accepting, love-producing part of you be the part that steers the ship. This is what we do deeply and thoroughly when you coach with me. If you want to learn more, head over to my website, www.lifeisworthloving.com, and you'll see the Work With Me tab. Click that. It'll share an overview of what we do together to make your marriage one that you love and the steps you need to take to actually become my client. All right. In the meantime, enjoy observing your own brain and being on this judgment cleanse, and be oh so well until next week.